In 1965, a bottlenose dolphin christened Peter was the subject of a scientific experiment. For 6 weeks, he lived in a flooded apartment in the Virgin Islands with a woman named Margaret Howe, who was tasked with teaching him human language. And this note used to have an extra line where it said, needless to say, this was not successful. And over time, I gradually realized that it was very much needless to say, and also that the book itself tells the story. So I'm just going to jump into it with the first poem that I wrote for the book when I first heard it, and just thought the whole thing was completely batshit, and I just had to get into it in some way. From a podcast, an episode of Radio Lab in 2014, I think, and this became this poem. I seldom had visitors. The doorbell never rings. I still anticipate the TV sitcom Bait and Switch, the postboy's shock as Peter concertinas through the water to the door, rotates the handle with his bottle nose and nabs the letter in his mouth, delivering a suave Midwestern thanks. And I descend, still fresh, from 6 weeks in a Lurex bathing suit to wait for his reply. I see the postboy, see the desk that hovers with its laminated paperwork, like the chrome cloud of an indifferent god. The hair I shaved to bring us closer, tufting out, my black lips like a faded mime. And I see Peter, halfway human now, his eyes above the water, sitting on his nose, easy as spectacles. Oh no, he says, it's no trouble at all, craning to sign, the pen between his teeth. I'm by his side, a painting of two homesteaders leaning on leaf nets as if they were farming tools. A bull bobs in the background, childishly, but we have put such things away. I ask him where he'd like our new delivery. We watch the postboy stagger, fish-legged, down the street, his mouth a gasping blowhole. And I think I'll read the second half of that. So this was originally one long-ish, well, no, I mean, it was a sort of 2-page poem, and I brought it to a workshop I was in Birmingham at the time, and was strongly advised that there was more material here than would really fit in one poem, so I should break it into two. And 5 years later, it's now a 48-page book, so that showed me. This is called 4th of July, and I guess is one of the first attempts at writing about exactly what went wrong with this experiment, which so many people seem to think would go well. 4th of July. Of course he wouldn't wear a hat. Of course the soggy ticker tape. Of course this can of frosting in the dark, water light softening its jagged edges. And for just a tick, I seriously thought, what if I slit his throat? The body bundled in the elevator, blood forming, blood spreading like a firework, like neurons forming point by point, until it reached the grouting. Richard and Aubrey, my dry boys, kept laughing when they slapped it on the walls, asking which one of us had chosen the shade of paint, me or the herring hog. Nothing from John, or even from that other kinder John, my diligent recorder. I guess he won't be checking up on me. I turned the set up. Peter yawped, my country 'tis of thee. My saturated bed, a second mermaid puberty. His jealous shrieks when my mother phoned. You can always come home. I gave my lesson. I wrung out the flag. 5 weeks and he can't count to 3. Some holiday. I spent it scrubbing algae from the walls, a bad joke in a spangled leotard, as Peter threw himself against the barriers of language, battering my legs with a distance that was almost human. So from those first two, I guess you've kind of got the main cast of characters. Margaret Howe herself, who narrates all of the poems except the last one. Peter the Dolphin, who never asked for any of this. And then John Lilly, who was the scientist behind it, who is a fascinating guy and a very deeply flawed guy who did a lot of damage, but someone who was very interesting to read about. He started out as a sort of quite buttoned up, in a way, 1950s scientist with a degree from MIT, and gradually throughout the late 50s and 60s kind of went off the rails into the depths of the counterculture, up to the point where he had kind of lost touch with mainstream scientific thought altogether. And so I guess I'm going to read a couple of poems that introduce you to John and sort of where John is coming from with this before returning to the story of Margaret and Peter proper. Origins of the Communication Research Institutes. John, what did you see that drew you to this secret harbour 8 miles east of Charlotte Amalie? A splash at the edge of geography, 10-year tracks in the sand behind me, God on the shore desalting the sea. A text with no bibliography, a Rorschach blot on a surgeon's sheet, a dish nacreous with LSD, a Frankish king's menagerie, colonial shirts, jellyfish trails, a whalebone wreck on the land of the free, a long tail dribbling downwards from Palm Beach. And I should say all the titles in the book come from John Lilly's The Mind of the Dolphin, which is his account of his interest in dolphins and this experiment, including Margaret Howe's original research notes. So all of the titles are taken from phrases that either John or Margaret herself wrote. You and me and the incredibly distant island universes. This is Margaret going to meet John for the first time. The man behind the glass removes his gloves. The man without his gloves, glittered in salt, flips up his goggle glasses, and he looks like a woodsman training as a legal clerk, tucked tightly in his suit, savage and tall. His pockets brim with pens. His notes are damp. He cracks the door. You want to speak to me? When John drinks coffee, and he does drink coffee, it's squid ink black and his jitters justified. That's how we do it and say, but tell me about you. I tried to hold my threadbare quilt of life, some college and a few hostessing shifts, up to him, and he burnt through and charged on. He told me that he was a journalist. No, that's not right, he said, a generalist, which seemed concerned with keeping people sane, although, of course, he said, so few of us are. Stubs in the ashtray, grey mulch in the cup. Into my soul, John said. Assume that you think the soul exists. What would you see? I didn't know. He told me, and it was a litany. The miles from Como to Cathedral Hill, the baseball stats for 1934, the fields of science and psychology all overlapping like a magic eye, the words of Christ, of Huxley and Karl Marx, and how it felt to drive a well-built car, guide in your hand a finely made machine, genetics as a branch of moral law and fucking as epistemology. He used that word, epistemology. Asked me to wait for him to finish work. I hold the joint like a laser scanning the surface of the moon. John bathes in thoughts while I just slowly pulse. And what he says is, Margaret, your mind with all its files and drawers, all its dark rot, has barely opened up unto itself. You're still so young. I like it that you're young, but how? And tell me this, how can we hope to know, to truly know the dolphin's mind when all we understand about ourselves is echoes, ego, a rat stuck in a tube, never suspecting life whirls on outside? When we so feebly sound our own still depths, how can we reach another consciousness? The mirror in the car is all his eyes. I didn't know. I said I didn't know. So I've read you some poems sort of from the middle of the experiment when basically after doing some sort of intermittent dolphin language training, Margaret suggests to John that it would be good for her and Peter to live together in an apartment flooded to knee height and to engage in a kind of 6-day-a-week language school. And everyone put money into this, thinking that might be smart. And I guess I'm just going to read a couple more poems that come from the middle of that sequence when things are really going nuts, and then I'll finish off with the final one. This is called Things I Left Out, because I think you've heard about some of the stuff she kept in. Not for the first time, I stood in the shower in moonlight, knee-deep seawater licking the cuts on my legs, and the thunk of the pump, and the shadows flitting like hallucinations from the tank. And to think of the hours of unusable tape, the fritzing phone line, the siphon, the weight of my walk through the slosh of my life with the 6 men in coats leaning over the side, and the prospect of wading, salt shrill in my blood, to a bed ineluctably clammy and damp, made me add to the mess, ugly, self-pitying tears. Every time, my eager, bright-eyed roommate called out to me like a human, clear and close, with a toy in his innocent mouth. I could reach out a hand through the shower curtain, bare like an opening flower, the reason all of it, any of it, should be here. No clicks or whistles, only a nuzzle, a nudge. With the urge of vocation, I slipped back into the water. There were no terms to it, no edges, no end. The sheet, the shower, retreated into the black of the balmy night. Light from the possible stars chimed on the water. Those were the moments we spoke, as tender as lovers, in awe of what we could become. There is one thing that most people who have heard of this experiment know about it before getting into a conversation with them any further, and it is that Margaret jacked off the dolphin. I don't have a lot to say about that, and I didn't want it to be the focus of the book. It feels in a way very sensationalist. There's a lot more going on, but obviously I had to address it within these poems, and so this may be the first and only time I read this. This is that event framed as I think it probably was mostly framed for Margaret as part of a scientific experiment. A very precious sort of thing. Audible pop, extrusion from the genital groove, penis rubbing fully erect on leg, perineal stimulation offered to subjective pre-ejaculatory state, peduncle fluke held oddly still, left eye closed, eye opened, pedicle fluke moved gently down, inevitability. Positive stimuli overcome inhibitors, exciting neurons in the spinal cord, relaying signals to the brain, prompting secretion, motor efferent discharge, womp womp. Contraction of the epididymis and vesicles, involuntary pumping of the bulbocavernosus, dense seminal fluid ejected from the tip, pulsive emission, muscles stretched up, all this repeated twice. And I'm going to read one more poem, which is more enjoyable than that, hopefully. This is, I'm going to read this, what a transition. I'm going to read this from my partner, who is here, and this is her favorite one from the sequence, so I thought she might like to hear it. This was originally called Peter Speaks, but now has a title which I can't pronounce because it is John Lee's attempt to or Margaret's attempt, I think, to transcribe the speech of a dolphin into Latin script. So say I start to talk the way you want me to, and say I speak about those overwater weeks. What would it mean to you, this vocal suit, this crawl towards the vertical? Now the cetacean chair will take the floor and tell you what you want to hear, that you were right, you saw me through the aquatint. But if my world was too wide and too wide to shunt into the traps of consonants, and I began to make you understand, what would you see? The sea meeting the logic of the land, swallows and burns, and goes away, and the land learns nothing that holds, nothing that fits into the vessels carved for it. This minstrelsy, this passing, soon is meaningless beneath the moon, which sways my home, which holds me down, which is itself reflected light on the wrong side of a long night. So say I rose sublunary and sleeved with rays you cannot see, and say my secrets rose up too in words that meant nothing to you, and say my story whistled, burst through your unhearing universe, incomprehensible and free, untamable as smoke, and say I spoke. Thanks very much to Aaron for publishing the book and for everyone for listening.
Thank you very much.